Okay, so what is hip mobility and what's the point of it with walking? Hip mobility means range of motion in your hips that you can control. So if you think about flexibility, that's your yogi with like the splits showing like something amazing on Instagram. But if you can't get there under your own control, it's not a very useful range of motion and tends to be associated with injuries. So mobility is where you control your entire range of motion and you have as much range of motion as you need to do whatever you need to do. And in the case of walking, what's primarily required is hip extension ability, which means the ability of your leg bone to go behind you as you walk. However, in order to achieve hip extension, you need a whole bunch of other stuff. You actually need to have hip rotation in both directions. You need to have hamstrings that are long as well. There's a bunch that goes into it. So having all-round hip mobility is very, very important if you want to walk in an optimal way. Now, I have a whole course on hip mobility for walking, but I'm going to give you the foundational piece today, and it's called a hip car. We're going to do the closed chain version, which is really nice because it's really portable and you don't look as much like a weirdo as you do when you do the open chain version. What closed chain means is that your feet are on the ground instead of in the air when you're doing it. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start just going straight into that hip hinge. We're going to just bend forward. This is hip flexion, so this is the opposite of hip extension. This is lengthening our hamstrings. Then we're going to come up. So here's our straight. So we've been extending our hips. Now we're going to go even further. We're actually going to push our pelvis forward. Try to lean back from your hips. See if you can open through the front of your hips without crunching at all in your spine. It's really your hips you want to move here. And then you're going to go back in. You're going to hinge. Hips move back. Flexion, your best flexion. You should feel this more in the backs of your legs. And then you're going to come forward and extend. So this is a part of our rotation. This is the flexion part of our rotation. This is the extension part of our rotation. Now we're going to move to the side-to-side part of our rotation, and this is the part where it really starts to feel awesome. I like to do this with my feet wide apart because I find it feels better. You can do it with your feet closer or wider, you choose. All you're going to do now is that same hinge forward. Feels pretty awesome. And then you're going to slide your hips out to the right side. And then smoothly slide and glide over to the left side. And as you're doing this work, I'm doing it pretty gently right now, just kind of like sliding around, gliding. I'm not super floppy, but I'm not really working hard either. However, you can add lots of tension to it if you want. So let's try that now. Let's try imagining that our hips are actually encased in a bowl of cold maple syrup. And you've got to push through that syrup to get all the way left. And now you've got to push through that syrup to get all the way right. You're just sliding back and forth, working a little harder this time, seeing what that's like for you. Never go into pain here, so if something doesn't feel right, just make your movement smaller. There's no need to go into pain and it's not helpful, but hopefully this isn't hurting. The other thing you want to think about here is making sure your hips are truly sliding side to side, so no rotation at the end. If you want, you can go back to our friend the wall and slide all the way right and all the way left. And see what that's like for you. That's a nice option as well. So that's a great exercise all by itself, just like the hip hinge. But now we're going to mash it up and we're going to do the true controlled articular rotation. I'm going to go feet wide. The outside edges of my feet are straight. And I'm going to talk you through it. So let's actually start with extension here. So here, our pubic bone is coming forward. We're leaning back a little bit in our upper body. You're lengthening through the fronts of the hips. And now you're circling around to the right. You're trying to get the biggest circle out of both of your hips that you possibly can. That's one reason it's nicer to have your feet wide here. You're coming back and around, and look at that. You're back in your hip flexion, and now you're seeking the other side of the circle. Try to make the biggest, smoothest, most controlled circle that you can, all the way left, and then coming all the way up into extension and opening up there. Let's do that one more time. Now that you've got the hang of it, you could try adding a little bit more work. So imagine that maple syrup bowl. You're moving through it smoothly, with control, at 1 mile an hour, but with some effort as well. All the way through. Oh, let's do one more because they're awesome. These are truly one of my favorite exercises to do when I'm hiking. They're a great thing to do whenever you take a rest. It's really helpful to do this exercise during or before walking because it's going to help your brain connect to your hip joints. In your hip joints, there's actually nerve endings that speak directly to your brain. They don't get bypassed through the spinal cord or through the interneurons, I guess more correctly. So you've got a really great communication channel between your brain and your hips, but you only get to communicate if you move those areas specifically. So that's why we're adding tension, is to increase the amount of feedback between your hips and your brain. Pretty cool, right? Let's come forward again and reverse. So now heading left, squeezing out as much movement as you can. So this right side's getting smaller, this left side's getting lengthened. Coming into your best hip hinge, smoothing out your circle, moving to the right side. The left side is closing, the right side is opening. All the way up and forward. All the way over. Pushing your pelvis with some muscles. Pretend your pelvis weighs 9 million pounds and you're having to actually work super hard to move your heavy, 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 heavy pelvis through this bowl of crazy maple syrup. And see what that's like for you. See if that changes the sensation. Because it's different from just doing this, right? I'm not just wobbling. I'm trying to go slowly and carefully and get the most out of my hips and the tissues that attach to my hips as I can. All right. So there you go. That's your basic closed chain hip car. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked all of this stuff. It's a great little package that you can enhance your walking with. It's going to give you a lot of value. And there's lots more where that came from. So when you're ready for more, make sure to check me out at petrafishermovement.com or download my Fix Your Feet Bootcamp. All right. Thanks for joining me, and I will catch you soon.